Good afternoon. I am so pleased to see so many of you here this afternoon. My name is Pam Lucky, and I'm the chair of the board of Kendall at Lexington. And this is a program that Lee Henkel and Jan and I conspired to put together. So we're hoping that we all get a lot out of it. I don't know about you, but I have often heard people say that Quaker values and principles are the secret sauce that makes living at Kendall at Lexington so welcoming. And so we were thinking a fair number of people in this room know what that secret sauce is, but some of the rest of us maybe aren't quite so sure. So Lee and Jan and I thought it would be valuable for more of us to really hear about the roots of Quakerism and more about Quaker principles and values. And as luck would have it, we know the perfect person to present this and be our guide, and that's Jane Mack. Jane is a lifelong Quaker and is also the president and the CEO of Friends Services Alliances. I had too many S's there. Friends Service Alliance. And that is a member organization of, more than 80 senior living communities that have their roots in Quakerism, including Kendall at Lexington. And we call on FSA often to help us with various services and surveys, etc. Jane has been there for 16 years, and before that she was in the healthcare industry. So she knows whereof she speaks, and she also is very conversant in nonprofit organizations and governance. So she knows Kendall, the Kendall organization very well, and I think she will know how to take us through this presentation. She will take questions at the end, so hold your thoughts until then. And with that, Jane, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. This is my first time coming to Kendall at Lexington. I've been to many of the Kendalls. I was saying to Pam a few minutes ago, when Crosslands, that's part of Kendall Crosslands, opened back in the late in the mid-1970s. I'm giving some secrets away here. When it opened, I was a waitress while I was in high school. So I had a long association with Kendall's in different ways. But it's a pleasure to be here and talk about Quaker values, and then after this I'm going to talk about friends decision-making or collaborative decision-making. As Pam said, I'm a lifelong Quaker. I know there are other people in this room who are also Quakers and have could probably give this program and maybe talk about it a little differently. That's one of the things I'll share as we get into this. My family is Quaker as far back as we can trace it. My mother's family came to, it wasn't the United States of America at that point, they came in the late 1500s from England to escape religious persecution. And my father's family came in the early 1600s, also to escape religious persecution. So both of the families were Quaker, and at some point they found their way to Westtown School, a Quaker school outside of Philadelphia, and they were neighbors and met and blah, 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 blah. So here I am. But Quakerism and Quaker values and how Quakers live their lives in the world is really the essence of who I am and how I live my life and how I like to approach my work and everything else. The Quaker meeting that we went to where we worshiped on Sundays and the people who belonged there, that was really the foundation of our social life growing up. There were social programs there once a month. On a Saturday night we had a potluck supper and some kind of program. And we'd have a couple celebrations once a year for different things. And that really was about what my life was growing up. My brothers and sisters and I'm one of 5. We were some of the few Quakers in the public school system where we went, but that area, there's a fair number of Quakers, and as I said, there's Westtown School, a Quaker school. The people were familiar with what Quakers were. So very, very interesting way to grow up and a time to grow up and an atmosphere to grow up. In my work at FSA, I talk about Quaker values. I talk about how they're integrated into organizational life all of the time. But a lot of people, if I am not talking about that, if I'm not in my FSA role, they wouldn't know I was a Quaker. It's not like I have a Q painted on my forehead. I realize today I am wearing black and white, which, and tomorrow, I'll be here tomorrow morning. I also am going to wear black and white, but that is for a reason. I only have to bring one pair of shoes. I can wear the same earrings. It just makes travel easier. But I assure you, I love to wear bright colors and lots of different things. But one of the, I would call it a motto, that's not really the right word, but I never can figure out the right word, about Quakerism is we say, let your life speak. So it's not what we're talking about and what we say about what we're going to do. And on Sundays we do this, and on Wednesdays we do something different. It's really about how we are in the world now with our fellow human beings, and the respect we have and how we treat each other. So my goals today are to share a little bit with you about the history of Quakerism, how it came to be, what it means today, some of our values and practices, as Pam said, and then maybe bust a few myths about Quakers too. I've found that to be one of the fun parts of my job. So, but it's important for you to know that Quakerism, it's a Christian faith, but it is not a religion that is defined by a prescribed set of beliefs and credos and that type of thing. It's a faith that is focused on how we are now with our fellow humans. I'll share when we go through this a bit more of what we call the Quaker testimonies, the spices. You may have heard them, you may have seen them written somewhere. And they're a way to talk about how we live in the world. But again, there's no, hard. When I do this program for employees at different organizations, and often we're in a room, it's a smaller group than this, and they close the door, I want to assure them it's not like you're in here and I'm not letting you out until you sign the card. I just want to share a little bit about experience and perspective, and what my story, how I look at being Quaker, what that means. Those of you who are here who are practice the Quaker faith or have been part of that, you may talk about it very, very differently. And that's really one of the joys and one of the challenges of Quakerism, is that there is no one absolute way that things have to be seen or done. So let's see if I can, every system works a little bit differently. Okay, so FSA, just real quick. As Pam said, FSA, Friends Services Alliance, we're the National Association of Senior Living Organizations whose roots are in the Quakers. We actually only have 28 member organizations, but we provide services to somewhere around 100, 110 organizations every year across the country, and all of them values aligned. So they may not have Quakerism in their root. We provide some services to Mennonite organizations, Brethren organizations, other faith-based organizations, that type of thing. But let's get started talking about the Quakers. Oh, wait a minute, why Jane? I'm sorry, real quick. I told you a little bit about me and my background. So on the left-hand side, that's a picture of the meeting house where I grew up, still a member. That's Middletown Meeting outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Up on the right-hand side, pictures of my wedding to my husband in the meeting house almost 39 years ago. We have this thing, we can't say 39 until we get to that day. We haven't reached 39 yet. But we got married in the Quaker meeting. As you can see, I don't know if you can tell, in the upper right is where we were saying our vows. There's no priest, no minister. That's one of the unique things in the unprogrammed Friends tradition. And if we get a chance, we'll talk about that. And then the bottom left is a picture of one of those potluck suppers I talked about that are part of the social life of a meeting. But let me hopefully make this little video work that talks a little bit about who are the Quakers.
What do I know about Quakers? Not too much, actually.
I'm ignorant on the subject matter.
Do we fix furniture?
They're not really technologically advanced.
They're cool. I know the Quakers founded the state of Pennsylvania with William Penn.
Okay. Here comes, see exactly what I said? It says they're not very technologically advanced. I do nothing to disprove that now.
You guys have to back out of your slide and then move it over.
That, no. And if it takes too much time, we'll skip the video. Okay, I minimized it. Okay, yeah. There it is. And I'll go back to the beginning.
That they're very peaceful people.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry.
What do I know about Quakers? Not too much, actually.
I'm ignorant on the subject matter.
Do we fix furniture?
They're not really technologically advanced.
They're cool. I know that Quakers founded the state of Pennsylvania with William Penn. That they're very peaceful people.
They're good people, they're peace-loving, and they don't take war.
It's a Christian-based organization.
They're non-violent, they believe in respecting everyone's opinions.
Very down-to-earth people, no frills, no fancy thing, no electricity, no television, no anything.
They're civil like God. That God would provide for them. They didn't need all these adornments and materialistic things in life to bring them closer to God.
Every morning when I go eat oatmeal, I see a Quaker on the front of the box.
There's oatmeal. It's good.
The only thing I know is that mascot for UK.
Quakers march for peace. They don't believe in war. As far as worshiping God, they believe that God's in every one of them.
They were very helpful during the slavery, that they were anti-slavery.
I know they believe in God. And I know that they do tremendous social and humanitarian work.
A lot of us could do well just to emulate them a little more than we do.
The Quaker meeting, that it's a time of reflection and quiet and people expressing themselves as they feel, the spirit.
I come here to be reconnected with God and to connect with the others in our community of faith who are doing the same thing. It inspires me, it guides me, it refreshes me, renews me to go out in the world, and it is the very center and the foundation for my being. It is just the very fabric of my life. The silence is a time to be able to settle, to declutter all those things that have been happening in my life, and to just be open to the Spirit and to guidance and direction of God. And it's most supportive to do it in community with other people who are doing the same. It's one thing to have just a relationship with God, and it's another to have a relationship in community with other people.
I've been thinking a lot about how rich connection to community and spirit can lead us as individuals and community to take action and to be agents of change and to do service at a greater level.
Everything we do in life, we're either going up towards heaven or we're falling down again. We're what they call a semi-programmed Friends meeting. And that means that we do have a sermon and we sing some hymns, but we also usually have a big block, 20 minutes or so, of quiet prayer time or quiet worship.
A challenge for us is always, at any time and any place, is to be engaged in an active conversation and dynamic with our God to remove the barriers where we can.
So with humility, we watch the tides that take on not only physical realities that humanity faces, but the spiritual ones as well. We watch and we call out evil. We watch and we apply justice.
We have an evangelical perspective. We really are attentive to Christ and Christ's presence here among us, as well as Scripture is important. It gives us a center, a foundation based on Scripture.
There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginnings of birth pains.
We want to allow a variety of space in our worship, so quiet, contemplative. And music and teaching from Scripture, and that kind of creates this environment where we as a community can come together and worship how God created us, because God created us unique and different, each individual.
Okay, so just a little bit of background about Quakerism, and hopefully I just busted one myth about Quakerism. I love the little story of the CEO of a Mennonite organization outside of Philadelphia. They've done a lot of work with big multi-site Mennonite organization. And he told me growing up, they had this little saying that was, Quaker meeting has begun, no more laughter, no more fun. Well, we got a good laughter right there, just with some of these film clips, so that's great. Just want to give you a little bit of historical perspective on how the Quaker faith came about. It emerged in the 1600s in northern England at a time of political unrest. If you're history buffs, you know that there was the Church of England, and that was the church. And you followed the tenets of the Church of England, you followed the instructions, and that was what you were supposed to believe. The Bible had been translated into English just about a generation before. And prior to that time, lay people had to rely on the priests or the scholars to interpret the Bible for them and therefore share what their interpretation was. So when the Bible was then translated into English that anyone could access, it began to create some different stirrings in folks. So one of those people was George Fox, and he is considered to be the founder or father of Quakerism. And he came to believe that every person can have a direct relationship with God, that we did not need a priest or a minister or some kind of intermediary to have that close relationship with God, and that by tapping into that and focusing that and doing that with others who believed the same, our lives would be better. There was a great emphasis put on tapping into that. Some people call it a spark of the divine, a spark of God, the inner light, the inner teacher, but whatever it is, one of the really foundational things in Quakerism is that center, that piece of the divine exists in every person. And we also believe that as we explore that, as we ourselves experience it more, experience life, and experience our fellow humans, that we can be changed, and we learn, and we evolve. And so it's not as if when those tablets came down from the mountain and the 10 Commandments were written, or the Bible was written, that was it. There was no further evolution. We believe that we continue to learn and grow and things change. So in a couple minutes I'll give you the names of those types of things, but it's important to think about those because they are really foundational elements of Quakerism. But from this powerful concept of there is this spark of the divine in everyone, George Fox and his followers broke the law. They disavowed the Church of England. They were persecuted, they were jailed, they were punished and tortured, but they were very strong and committed to their faith. And from that, the Religious Society of Friends, which is the official name for Quakerism, it emerged. And that new organizational structure, so to speak, of the new Christian faith. So some of the truths that emerge for early Quakers, as I said, we've got these various terms, inner light, spark of the divine. The language doesn't really matter, it's the concept that matters. But that personal experience is available to everyone. And in our lives, we should make sure we're paying attention to that. It's how we live in the world, it's how we express ourselves and express our faith. It informs the manner in which we worship. You know, you saw 3 variations of Quaker worship in the video. So the first one you saw where folks were just sitting in silence, and then at one point a woman stood up and spoke. That's what is called unprogrammed friends. There's not a minister or a pastor. Each person is really to be a minister to themselves and to share with the community. And that's mostly what you see here on the East Coast. Then you heard a gentleman talk about being a semi-programmed Friends meeting. So they have a Quaker pastor, and their services, they will have a sermon and some organized speaking and hymns and that type of thing. And then they'll also have a period of quiet. And that you'll see more in the Midwest, Western Ohio, Indiana. That particular video we filmed in Richmond, Indiana, if any of you have ever been there, home of Earlham University, which is a Quaker college, and there's a good Quaker population there in Richmond, Indiana. And then there's the programmed Friends, or evangelical Friends, and that was the one that was more like your traditional Protestant church. They had the bell choir, absolutely lovely, the young female pastor, and that we filmed in Oregon, so on the West Coast is where we'll typically see more evangelical Friends churches. So all of those are different ways that Quakers practice their faith, but some of these fundamental tenets are the same across that. So when I talk about the unprogrammed Friends and that this spark of the divine and not needing an intermediary, so to speak, informs how we worship, how we have our marriage ceremonies. So if you remember the picture of my husband and my wedding, I pointed out there was no pastor or no minister. You can get a license that says you're going to marry yourselves. We stood up and said our vows to each other, and everyone who was at the ceremony has to sign it as a witness. And yes, our friends all asked us, "Are you really legally married?" Yes, we are. And but again, that's part of how we believe we each connect with the divine, and so we pledged our love for each other and our commitment in front of the divine, and we didn't need someone else there to help us do that. So the Quakers who were involved in founding Kendall and the Kendall system were from the unprogrammed Friends tradition from outside of Philadelphia. There's literature available about how the Kendall system came to be, I know, and I'm happy to share that when we're done if anybody wants to know. But they came from the unprogrammed Friends tradition from the Philadelphia region. So, as I said, Quakerism today is really a lived experience. It's a way of life versus a specific set of beliefs. As far as numbers, and I know this map is really hard to read. It's hard to read even if you have it in front of you on a computer. But if you can tell where the black dots are, that's where you'll find Quakers today. There are only about 400,000 Quakers in the world today, and less than 100,000 of them are in the U.S. So it's a declining faith, unfortunately, but it is. The places where Quakerism is growing the fastest are in Africa and very southern South America, Brazil, and that is the evangelical Friends tradition. And part of the reason there may be declining numbers is in the unprogrammed Friends tradition, we don't believe in proselytizing, so we don't go out and recruit people to come to meeting and experience Quakerism and think about becoming members of our faith. And it doesn't necessarily help when you're trying to maintain the numbers, but again, it's about how we live our lives. It's not about what we're talking about or bringing people to. So some of these fundamental concepts I've already talked about, but I just wanted to give words to them. The spark of the divine in each of us, and I've talked about that in a couple of ways, so I won't say anymore. This idea of continuing revelation, that's what we call this idea that everything is not set in stone now and that's it, that we're always learning and evolving and changing. The way my mother used to talk about it was the truth that I know today may not be the truth that I know tomorrow, because something different happens, something changes. So those two fundamental concepts are a big piece of our faith, spark of the divine and continuing revelation. When people ask what Quaker values are, a lot of time you'll hear people say spices, and we'll talk about the spices in a minute. They're really just a way to talk about the values. The actual values of Quakerism, the best way that I know to express them are presence, connection, and listening. So when you've heard me say a couple times, Quakerism is really about how we're living our lives now in the world with our fellow human being. Presence, connection, and listening. We are here with you in community, in relationship. We're working to build connections as fellow human beings. And deep listening is an essential part of Quakerism, to really respect and understand other people, even when things may be different than how I see them or how I think they should be. So presence, connection, and listening. Trying to articulate what Quakers actually believe is really difficult because it differs from person to person. But if I can do this right, I've got a little video here that I think is good. So this is a man, his name is Arthur Larrabee. He is a well-known Quaker who spent many, many years speaking about Quakerism, teaching about Quakerism. He was the person you went to teach about collaborative decision-making, which I'm going to talk about after this program. But Arthur has retired. But he made this great little video. So let's see if I can make this work.
What do Quakers believe? I would always answer that question somewhat defensively. I would say, it's kind of hard to know what Quakers believe, but let me tell you what I believe. Or I would say, well, it's hard to know what Quakers believe today, but let me tell you what Quakers believed at the beginning. Or I would say what I thought Quakers believed, and I would hope that no one else was listening because I did not want to be overcalled. and so I had all of those experiences as a lifelong Quaker, and I said, this is for the birds. You know, we can do better than this. My name is Arthur Larrabee. I am a member of Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting. I live near Westchester, Pennsylvania, very close to Westtown School. My work in the world is the work of teaching and consulting about Quaker decision-making. In attempting to name what I believe are core principles or core beliefs of the Religious Society of Friends as understood by unprogrammed Quakers, is I'm hoping that we would move in the direction of strengthening our faith practice, and strengthening our faith practice with each other, and be more clear and affirming of what we're able to say to the world, what we're able to carry out into the world. There is a living, dynamic, spiritual presence at work in the world, which is both within us and outside of us. Quakers use many names to describe this spiritual presence. Among the names we use are God and Spirit and the light, the inward light, the inner light, Christ, truth, love. There is that of God in everyone. This statement of belief is similar to the first statement. And Quakers will talk about there being that of God in everyone, and it is the belief that the Creator has endowed each person with a measure of the divine essence. And that as a consequence, all of life is sacred and interconnected. Each person is capable of the direct and unmediated experience of God. Our belief leads us into a form of worship that does not rely on clergy or liturgy or creed. Rather, we come together in the silence. We sometimes refer to our worship as waiting worship. Waiting to hear, listen for the still small voice within, and listening for that of God, the still small voice speaking to us. Our understanding and experience of God is nurtured and enlarged in community. When we come together in community, each of us brings our own manifestation of the divine energy. And when we come together in community, we experience and embrace our diversity. We experience a much larger understanding and vision of God. The Bible is an important spiritual resource, and the life and teachings of Jesus are relevant for us today. For many of us, the Bible is an inspired record of humankind's interaction with God through the ages. Quakers find that the truth and the teachings found in the Bible are an inspiration for daily living and also an inspiration for our worship together. The revelation of God's truth is continuing and ongoing. Quakers are very clear that the revelation of God's truth did not end with the writing of the Bible. We believe that God has continued to reveal God's truth and make God's will and God's energy, truth, known to humankind down through the ages, down to the present day. Quakers welcome truth from whatever source it may come. We find that our experience of worship and our experience of the divine is enriched by welcoming truth from different sources, welcoming spiritual truth from different sources. Our inward experience of God transforms us and leads us into outward expressions of faithful living, witness, and action. Individually and collectively, we witness to God's presence in our lives by the way we live our lives and the way we model God's truth in the world. One of the consequences of listening for the inward voice and being led into outward expressions of faithful living, witness, and action are Quaker testimonies. Testimonies that are well known today are testimonies of simplicity and peace and integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. Modeling God's presence in our lives is more important than espousing beliefs. Quakers believe that the way we live our lives is of much more importance than what we say. There's an old Quaker expression, let your life speak. And that's very much a part of Quakerism. The understanding that the way we model God's truth in our lives is to let our lives speak it.
I'm here at Friends Center.
Of course, that was my last little thing. Now I have the hang of how to do it. But, anyway, I always enjoy that little video and hearing somebody else talk about how they interpret Quakerism. I thought, as Arthur said, one of the things we often hear talked about more often is spices as a way to talk about Quaker values. And spices was actually developed by the Quaker schools as a way to teach children about Quaker values. Because how do you explain to, a fifth grader, to a third grader, what presence, connection, and listening means? And what does it mean that Quakerism is really about how we live in the world? So SPICES was an acronym that they developed that helped them to teach that. And I thought, Arthur told you, name them, and I think each Quaker you would talk to might explain them a little bit differently. There's always this, I always heard this growing up, that if you ask a question about Quakerism, you ask Quaker A, and then you ask Quaker B, you're gonna get two different answers. And it's really interesting. I actually have an identical twin, and I mean identical. She's 3 minutes younger than I am. We don't think we look alike, everybody else does. We sound alike. If I hear my voice on a recording, I think it's Betsy. We're in similar fields, so much alike. Raised in the same household, raised in the same Quaker meeting. But you ask us some questions and we'll answer them a bit differently because it is a very personal experience. So I thought I might share with you how I think about the spices. And it's important to say that the spices and the presence, connection, and listening, these are all just really good human values and good human characteristics or virtues or whatever. And Quakers don't claim to have a corner on anything. It's just how we have chosen to articulate it to frame how we aspire to live and work and be in the world. So simplicity, to me, is not allowing the trappings and the chaos of everyday life interfere with my ability to connect with that spark of the divine in me and to maintain that relationship, to have access to my own inner light, and to pay attention to what's important. And it can be tough at the pace things go at today, with jobs, raising a family. Our kids are grown now, we've got grandchildren and that type of thing. But life can get pretty chaotic, and it can be pretty easy to just not take time to pay attention to this. So to me, that's what simplicity is about, is making sure that I'm not letting all the other stuff get in the way of still tapping into this. Peace, that's pretty easy, peace and nonviolence. But if each person has a spark of the divine within them, then let's try to live our lives in a way that respects that takes away the occasion for war, which is really hard to think about in today's world, but that's what we aspire to. And look at conflict as an opportunity for growth and understanding. So that's what peace means to me. Integrity, the I in spices, is about that letting my life speak, and what's inside and the way it manifests itself outside are the same. I'll never forget, so I grew up in a Quaker household. Quaker meeting was, 90% of the people I was surrounded by in most of my life were Quakers. Then I went off to college at Penn State. So I used to tell my parents, oh, I'm getting a really good education. And I was in a lot of different things. But religion and faith weren't really part of that. But then my first job, my undergraduate degree is in food service and nutrition. And my first job was a manager in the dietary department in a big hospital in Wheeling, West Virginia. If anybody ever been to Wheeling, I spent 3 years there. They're 3 wonderful, wonderful years. But it was a big 700-bed hospital, lots of people. But I'll never forget one of the women who worked in the salad area, making salads. And she would sing hymns all day long. And then one day, I did something that she did not like. And she turned around and cursed me out in a way I had never heard. And to me, that was such a disconnect between how I want to be inside, how I want to be outside, and that what I say and what I do should be the same. So to me, that's what integrity is about, living my life with honesty and with respect. Community is a huge part of Quakerism because we believe that we are enriched when we are a group. In our worship, in our decision-making, collaborative decision-making that I'll talk about later, we believe that we make better decisions when it's not just about the me, it's about the we. And we see community as a philosophy, not just a physical place. Equality is another big one of our testimonies, that everybody's voice is important, and that we need to not only listen to everybody's voice, we need to seek out those voices that we're not hearing, and that everybody has an equal standing because we all have that spark of the divine in us. And then stewardship, and that's about taking good care of all the resources we have. When what I have heard, when they first developed the acronym SPICES and they said stewardship, it was about taking care of the earth. But in my mind and in our business, it's beyond just the earth. It's taking care of being good stewards of all the good gifts we've been given. So it means that our partners who work with us, it means our financial gifts, being good stewards of all of the things that we have been fortunate enough to have under our care and to share with our community. So to me, those are what spices mean. But as I said, you may talk to another Quaker and they might tell you something very, very different. One of the very unique things about Quakerism is our method of decision making. I'm not going to spend any more time other than that slide, but again, it's based in equality, spark of the divine in everyone, and community. Just thought I'd show you some quick famous Quakers, and actually when I get to the famous Quakers, you all might appreciate them. As I do this program for staff at organizations, and they're younger and younger, they don't necessarily know who some of them are. But Quakers have always been very much at the forefront in terms of social justice, very much active in terms of women's rights. So now, do you have a Lucretia Mott room or building? Or many of the Quaker communities have a Mott something. So Lucretia Mott, she was actually very involved in the abolition movement, as well as the Women's Rights Conference in Seneca Falls, so she was a Quaker. Margaret Fell, an early Quaker, actually ended up marrying George Fox, who was the founder of Quakerism, but she was a Quaker minister. So they had female ministers way back then. Alice Paul, so we heard her name a lot a couple of years ago when we were celebrating women's right to vote. So she was a Quaker. And then Bayard Rustin, so he was an advisor to Martin Luther King, helped to organize the March on Washington Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There's now a movie out about him. He was a Quaker. Now here comes some famous Quakers. Ben Kingsley. So you all know who Ben Kingsley is? Yeah, so tell that to a room of 20-year-olds. They don't know. Unless he starred in one of the Star Trek movies or Marvel or Avengers, they don't know who it is. Gandhi, exactly, Gandhi. Joan Baez, the folk singer, was a Quaker. Judi Dench. Yes, and she actually in an interview a couple years ago, somebody asked her about it, and she said, "It's just absolutely who I am." So I tell the younger folks, you know, she was M in the early James Bond movies. That they can relate to. Bonnie Raitt, the singer, also a Quaker. Yeah. I tried to Google the other day, famous Quakers under the age of 50. Lots of them that went to Quaker schools. There are a couple of singers came up, fairly popular singers who went to Quaker schools, but they're not members of the Religious Society of Friends. So, getting ready to wrap up and move to questions. Kendall, as I said, the first Kendall communities, and then ultimately the Kendall system grew from that, came out of a group of unprogrammed friends in eastern Pennsylvania. And they have in their book values and practices that they, as the system grew and began to include organizations that they didn't build from the ground up and were from other faith traditions, they developed what they called the Kendall values. But they continue to very much parallel Quaker values, and in their book, Values and Practices, they talk about they continue to draw strength and wisdom from their Quaker connection. They are all members of FSA. I do this kind of program for a lot of them, wonderful, wonderful organizations. I often say I think one of the best manifestations of Quaker values in the United States is our retirement communities. Because there is something special when you walk in the door. I've been in hundreds of retirement communities, and there is something special when you walk in a Quaker one that just feels different. But I would close with this quote I absolutely love from George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, that we should walk gently and cheerfully over the earth, answering that of God in everyone and everything. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. If I can, I will tell you. If I can't, I will tell you if it's my interpretation. And I welcome anybody else in the room to chime in who may have a different response. Any questions?
Can a Quaker marry a non-Quaker?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Very rarely. So I will tell you that my husband is a Quaker. We actually grew up in the same meeting. Very unusual. We've known each other since we were like 2. When we got married, we were the first 2 members of our meeting to get married in 50-some years. And no others have since that. And we're about to celebrate 39 years. Now, other Quakers do marry other Quakers, but again, with those declining numbers. So like both of our children married non-Quakers. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. It's the Shakers that they weren't allowed to marry outside, and no more Shakers, right?
Is there some kind of special relationship between the Brethren and Quakers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is there a relationship between the Brethren and the Quakers?
So the Quakers, the Brethren, and the Mennonites are considered the 3 historic peace churches. And so they came out of the, when things moved away from the Church of England and then the Reformation and all that. I'm not a religious scholar, but there was this commitment to peace and nonviolence. And we actually still do a lot of work with the Brethren and the Mennonite associations. They have a lot of retirement communities as well. Last week I was at a Brethren retirement community. Next week I'll be at a Mennonite. So way back when, there's a connection. There still is today. The Brethren and the Mennonites will have pastors. The way they worship is a bit different. It's certainly more programmed than the unprogrammed Friends tradition, but the roots are in common. She's coming with the microphone.
Well, you're very helpful to me. I am doing a little bit of research, and I started with the name Kendall. Why was Kendall picked for all these senior communities?
I will tell you what I have heard. I don't know if it's true, but there's a location in England, Kendall, where there was a large Quaker population, and it was so connected back to that. That's what I've heard. Have you found anything different in your research?
Yes.
Okay.
You must be Quakers. Each one is different.
Each one, so it's Kendall at, or Kendall of, or Kendall on. And now there's some others that don't even have Kendall in their name, but they'll say they're an affiliate of Kendall.
I respect them all.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know about, well, it just seems that Quakerism is very much a group of people that attracts people, but you don't actually evangelize. You talked about it being connected, some of them with evangelical, but not in the sense of evangelizing. So I'm wondering how does one become a Quaker?
So if one wants to become a Quaker, you need to go to a Quaker meeting, probably go a number of times to make sure it's something that you feel comfortable with. And then you would express your desire. One thing, and I imagine it's true here at Kendall at Lexington, Quakers are big on committees. And we are in our houses of worship as well. So there would be a committee that, we always have what's called a clerk of our meeting who's, they're not a pastor, they have no authority, but they're kind of the chief organizer, and that role changes, every couple of years. But you would speak to someone who that you're interested in becoming a member. And then they would have you meet with a committee to talk about why you were interested in becoming a member, and what is it that connects with you. And then they would talk about it. And then if they felt it was a good connection, they might talk to you some more. And then ultimately it comes to the business meeting to be decided by the meeting itself, a group decision. That's how you become a Quaker. And there are many, many people who attend Quaker meetings for years and never decide to become members. So we call them active attenders. But that's the same with all organized religion these days. You just don't want to sign on the dotted line,
Jane, I have a question. When you showed the famous Quakers, Ben Franklin was not among them. He was not a Quaker.
He was not a Quaker.
But he was a Quaker sympathizer.
He was a Quaker sympathizer. He very much did things that are consistent with the way Quakers would go about it. And if you think about Pennsylvania, William Penn is the founder of Pennsylvania. He was a Quaker. And so yes, Ben Franklin did a lot of things very consistently with Quaker philosophies, but he was not a Quaker.
And you also didn't show Richard Nixon, but I thought he was.
No. Quaker, you Google it, that's who comes up. So he was raised in a Quaker meeting, but did not practice Quakerism in his adult life. And certainly,
given that a great majority of the residents here, and I assume staff, are not Quakers, what is required of us who are not in living our lives here at Kendall?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I'm the expert. I think what I would say is that we would ask that you think about recognizing the value of community and live in ways that are consistent with that. When you move into a community like Kendall at Lexington, things have to be done, decisions have to be made that are for the we, not the me. And recognizing that. And that you're here, that hopefully living in community enriches you, and then you help enrich the community for others. Does that respond to your question?
And I think being open, and I believe being open to the process that we use. We do use consensus here. We don't vote. And understanding that sometimes that may take a little longer than you would like.
There's another one back here. While somebody gets a microphone to her, I'll tell you somebody asked me once, what's my favorite Quaker story? So how many of you remember who Bobby Knight was? In basketball? He wasn't a Quaker. But he would quote his saying, never recruit a kid from a Quaker school because they want everybody to win.
Are we here at Kendall at Lexington a Quaker community, or are we a retirement community based on Quaker values?
Yeah, that is not one for me to answer. You are a nonprofit entity founded in Virginia, and you are part of the Kendall system, and your philosophy is grounded in Quaker values. The way I would answer this, and I'm going to say this is Jane's answer, the only true Quaker organizations are houses of worship. A Quaker school, a Quaker retirement community, Quaker businesses, FSA. We are businesses that frame the way we work and approach things in Quaker values. But in my thinking, the only true Quaker organizations are the houses of worship.
I would agree with that. Jan, would you? Yeah.
Yeah,
the latter.
absolutely. I would say that we are a community grounded into Quaker values, not necessarily a Quaker community.
One last question? So the way that I always heard that little poem that you created, Quakers meeting has begun, no more talking, no more fun, no more chewing gum. That's very good. Yeah. All right, well, the board members who are here, we will now adjourn to Sunnyside House, and Jane will help us understand more about collaborative decision-making. And I think tomorrow morning, where are you, Lee? What time is the meeting tomorrow with conveners? Yeah. At 10 a.m. But for now, let's just give Jane a big round of